The stage rocked to a halt at the Pahrump, Nevada station 3 hours past midnight in December of 1881, and nobody came to claim the woman shivering inside, her lips turning the color of frozen blueberries. Beatrice Rosewood pressed her trembling hands against the frosted window, watching her breath create small clouds in the frigid air. The driver had already unhitched the horses and disappeared into the warmth of the saloon across the muddy street, leaving her alone with her trunk and her dwindling hope. She had traveled all the way from Boston, responding to a carefully worded advertisement from a rancher named Gerald Hutchins, who needed a wife to help manage his homestead. His letters had been brief but kind, promising her a future far from the suffocating expectations of her aunt's household, where she had lived since her parents' death from scarlet fever 2 years prior. But Gerald Hutchins was nowhere to be seen. Beatrice wrapped her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did little against the bitter cold that seeped through the stage coach's wooden walls. The temperature had dropped dramatically as they climbed into the higher elevation of Nevada, and her traveling clothes, sensible for Boston's winter, felt inadequate against this sharp, dry cold that seemed to cut right through to her bones. She was 22 years old, educated, and considered pretty enough with her chestnut hair and gray eyes, but none of that mattered if she froze to death before her intended husband bothered to collect her. An hour passed. Then another. Beatrice's fingers had gone numb despite her gloves, and her feet felt like blocks of ice in her leather boots. She tried stamping them against the coach floor, but the movement only seemed to make the cold worse. Through the window, she could see the occasional figure hurrying between buildings, bundled against the weather, but no one approached the stage. The sky was beginning to lighten with the false dawn when she heard boots crunching through the frozen mud outside. Hope flared in her chest, and she peered through the window, trying to see who approached. A tall figure in a heavy coat stopped near the stage, holding a lantern high. "Anyone in there?" The voice was deep, rough with cold or perhaps disuse. "Yes," Beatrice called out, her voice cracking from the chill. "Please, I have been waiting for hours." The door opened, and the lantern light flooded in, momentarily blinding her. When her eyes adjusted, she saw a man perhaps 27 or 28 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly under his hat and eyes that looked nearly black in the dim light. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of beard. He wore chaps over his trousers and a heavy sheepskin coat, and even in her half-frozen state, Beatrice noticed the way he carried himself with a quiet confidence. "Lord have mercy," he said, his eyes widening as he took in her condition. "How long have you been sitting here?" "Since the stage arrived," Beatrice managed through chattering teeth. "Around 3 o'clock, I believe. I am waiting for Gerald Hutchins. Do you know him? Is he coming?" Something flickered across the man's face, an expression Beatrice could not quite read in the lantern light. He set the light down on the step and reached up to help her down from the coach. His hands were large and warm even through her gloves, and she practically fell into his arms as her frozen legs refused to hold her weight properly. "Easy now," he said, steadying her against his chest. "Can you walk?" "I think so," Beatrice said, though she was not at all certain. She tried to take a step and would have fallen if not for his strong arm around her waist. "My horse is tied over there," he said, nodding toward a handsome bay gelding standing patiently at a hitching post. "I am taking you to get warm. We can sort everything else out after you thaw." "But my trunk," Beatrice protested weakly. "And Mr. Hutchins, he will be looking for me." "Your trunk will keep, and Hutchins—" The man paused, his jaw tightening. "Hutchins is not coming, miss." "Now, let me get you somewhere warm before you lose your toes to frostbite." Beatrice wanted to ask what he meant, but her mind felt as sluggish as her frozen limbs. She allowed him to half carry her to his horse, where he lifted her into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. He swung up behind her, wrapping his coat around them both and pulling her back against his chest. "Hold on," he said, and urged the horse into a careful walk down the rutted street. Beatrice could feel the warmth of his body seeping into her back, and she found herself leaning into it shamelessly. He smelled of leather and wood smoke and something else, something clean like pine. They rode for what felt like only a few minutes before stopping in front of a modest house with a wide porch and smoke rising from the chimney. "This is my place," the man said, dismounting and reaching up to lift her down. "I am Roland Vance. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who lives in the back room. She will help you get warm and find you some dry clothes." "Mr. Vance," Beatrice said, trying to summon some propriety despite her desperate situation. "I cannot impose on you this way. If you could direct me to a hotel or boarding house." "The nearest hotel burned down last month, and the boarding house is full of miners," Roland said bluntly. "Unless you want to sleep in the livery stable, you are staying here tonight. Tomorrow, when you are not half frozen, we can discuss what to do about your situation." He carried her up the porch steps and through the front door into a front room that felt like heaven. A fire burned brightly in a stone fireplace, and the heat hit Beatrice's face like a physical thing. She gasped at the sudden warmth, and tears sprang to her eyes, though she could not say if they were from relief or the sting of blood returning to her frozen cheeks. "Mrs. Chen," Roland called out, and a small, elderly Chinese woman appeared from a doorway at the back of the house. She took one look at Beatrice and began speaking rapidly in a mix of English and what Beatrice assumed was Chinese. "Found her in the stagecoach," Roland explained. "Been there since it arrived hours ago. She needs to get warm before anything else." Mrs. Chen nodded briskly and gestured for Roland to bring Beatrice to the fireplace. Within moments, Beatrice found herself installed in a cushioned chair pulled close to the hearth with Mrs. Chen removing her frozen gloves and boots with gentle efficiency. The housekeeper made disapproving noises as she examined Beatrice's hands and feet, but seemed satisfied that no lasting damage had been done. Roland disappeared into another room and returned with a thick quilt and a pair of wool socks. "These will be too big," he said, handing them to Mrs. Chen, "but they are warm." Mrs. Chen shooed him away and proceeded to help Beatrice remove her damp outer clothing, wrapping her in the quilt and pulling the oversized socks onto her feet. Then she hurried to the kitchen and returned with a cup of something hot that steamed fragrantly. "Drink, Mrs. Chen commanded, pressing the cup into Beatrice's hands. "Make you warm inside." Beatrice sipped carefully. It was some kind of ginger tea with honey, and it burned wonderfully all the way down to her stomach. She could feel the warmth spreading through her body, and gradually her shivering began to ease. Roland had moved to stand by the window, looking out at the lightening sky. He had removed his hat, and Beatrice could see his profile clearly now in the firelight. He had a straight nose and a firm mouth, and there was something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of a man who carried burdens he had not asked for. "Mr. Vance," Beatrice said when she had drunk enough tea to feel her tongue working properly again. "What did you mean when you said Gerald Hutchins is not coming?" Roland turned from the window, and in the growing light, Beatrice could see his eyes were not black but a very dark brown. He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words. "Gerald Hutchins died 4 days ago," he said finally. "Pneumonia took him quick. He was already sick when he met the stage last week, must have gotten worse after. Doc Peterson said he was gone within 48 hours of taking to his bed." The words hit Beatrice like a physical blow. She set down her teacup with shaking hands that had nothing to do with the cold. "Dead," she repeated. "But his last letter was dated only 3 weeks ago. He said he was looking forward to my arrival, that everything was prepared." "I am sure it was," Roland said quietly. Gerald was a good man, always kept his word, but pneumonia does not care about a man's plans. He moved closer, pulling up another chair to sit across from her. "Did you have family back east? Someone who could send you money for the return fare?" Beatrice shook her head slowly. "No. My parents died of scarlet fever, and I lived with my mother's sister in Boston. She made it clear when I left that I was making my own choice, and she would not welcome me back if things did not work out. I spent nearly everything I had on the journey here." She could hear the desperation creeping into her own voice and hated it. She had been so careful, so hopeful. Gerald Hutchins's letters had painted a picture of a simple but good life on his ranch, and she had let herself dream of a fresh start, of building something new far from the stifling society of Boston, where her reduced circumstances made her an object of pity at best, disdain at worst. "How much do you have left?" Roland asked, his voice matter of fact rather than judgmental. Beatrice calculated quickly in her head. "Perhaps $7, she admitted, "and some small jewelry, nothing valuable." Roland leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. Mrs. Chen brought Beatrice more tea and set a plate of bread and butter on the small table between them. The elderly woman patted Beatrice's shoulder comfortingly before retreating to give them privacy. $7 will not get you far," Roland said. "Stage fare back to California is more than that, never mind all the way to Boston." He paused, seeming to struggle with something internally. "What skills do you have? Can you cook, so keep accounts?" "Yes to all three," Beatrice said, lifting her chin. "I ran my aunt's household for 2 years after my parents died. I can cook plain food well, fancy food adequately. I can sew and mend, do fine embroidery work, keep household accounts, and I can read and write well enough to teach children if needed." "Can you handle ranch work?" "Feeding chickens, gathering eggs, tending a garden, preserving food for winter?" "I have never done those things specifically," Beatrice admitted, "but I am willing to learn. I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Vance." Roland studied her face for a long moment, and Beatrice met his gaze steadily despite her exhaustion and fear. She might be stranded and nearly penniless in a rough Nevada town, but she still had her dignity and her determination. She would not beg, would not dissolve into useless tears, no matter how much her situation warranted it. "I have been managing my ranch alone for the past year," Roland said slowly. "Had a housekeeper before Mrs. Chen, but she married and moved to California last winter. Mrs. Chen comes in daily to cook and clean, but she has her own family to tend to. The place could use a woman's touch, someone to help manage the household side of things while I handle the cattle and horses." He paused, rubbing his jaw. "It would not be proper for you to live here as things stand. Town would talk, and you would be ruined even beyond your current circumstances." Beatrice's heart sank. She had allowed herself a moment of hope that perhaps he was offering her employment, a way to earn enough to figure out her next step. But of course, a single woman could not live in a bachelor's household, not without destroying any chance she might have of a respectable future. "However," Roland continued, and Beatrice's attention snapped back to him, "there is another option. It is going to sound strange, given that we met only an hour ago, but hear me out." Beatrice nodded, hardly daring to breathe. Gerald Hutchins sent for a mail-order bride because he needed help running his ranch and wanted companionship in his older age. His circumstances were not so different from mine, except I am younger and my ranch is larger. You came all this way expecting to marry a man you had never met to start a new life. The man you expected to marry is dead, but the need that brought you here, the desire for a fresh start, that is still real. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I am proposing that you marry me instead. Beatrice felt her mouth fall open in shock. Of all the things she had expected him to say, that had not been among them. Mr. Vance, we do not even know each other. You did not know Gerald Hutchins either except through letters, Roland pointed out. At least with me, you have met face to face. You can see I am not ancient or cruel, and I can see you are sensible and honest. Those seem like decent starting points for a practical marriage. A practical marriage, Beatrice repeated faintly. Yes. I need help with the ranch and a proper household. You need a home and security. We could make an arrangement that benefits us both. Roland's dark eyes were serious, searching her face. I will not lie and promise you romance or grand passion, but I can promise you respect, a roof over your head, food on the table, and my protection as your husband. I will not mistreat you, and I will expect you to hold up your end by managing the household and helping with the ranch work as you are able. Beatrice's mind raced. It was insane. She had known this man for less than 2 hours, but what were her other options? She could try to find work in Pahrump, but as Roland had pointed out, opportunities for respectable single women in a rough mining town were limited and dangerous. She had no money to return east, and no home to return to even if she did. At least Roland Vance had proven himself kind by rescuing her from the stagecoach and bringing her to warmth and safety. He could have left her there, could have taken advantage of her desperate situation, but instead he was offering her a solution, however unconventional. Why? She asked finally. Why would you tie yourself to a stranger when you could surely find a wife through more conventional means? You seem established, capable. There must be women in town who would be interested. A shadow crossed Roland's face. There are some, he admitted. But I have my reasons for preferring an arrangement with someone from outside Pahrump, someone who does not know my history or have expectations beyond what I have stated. He stood abruptly, moving back to the window. I had a wife once, Sarah. She died 18 months ago, bringing our child into the world. The baby, a son, died with her. Oh, Beatrice breathed. Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. It was a love match, Roland continued, his voice rough. We grew up together, married young, thought we would have 50 years together. When I lost her, I lost everything that mattered. I am not looking to replace her, Miss Rosewood. I could never do that. But I am tired of rattling around this house alone, tired of the pitying looks from the townspeople who remember her. A practical arrangement with someone new, someone I can build a partnership with without the ghosts of the past shadowing everything, that appeals to me. Beatrice understood then. He was not looking for love because he had already spent his capacity for it on the wife he lost. He wanted companionship, help, a reason to keep building his life but without the emotional risk of falling in love again. It was sad and pragmatic and somehow honest in a way that moved her. If I agreed, she said carefully, what exactly would you expect of me? As your wife, I mean. Roland turned back to face her, and she saw a faint flush creep up his neck. I would expect you to manage the household, help with ranch work as needed, present yourself as my wife to the community. As for the marital side of things, the bedroom, I would not force anything on you. We could start with separate rooms, give you time to adjust to your new life to me. If eventually we chose to have a more traditional marriage in all respects, that would be your decision as much as mine. It was more consideration than many husbands showed their wives, Beatrice knew. She had heard enough stories from other women to know that marital duties were often expected immediately, and without much care for the wife's feelings on the matter. Roland was offering her time, space, and the right to choose. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "As long as you need," Roland said. "You can stay here as a guest, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Chen until you make up your mind. If you decide against it, I will lend you the money for stage fare to wherever you want to go, and you can pay me back when you are able." Beatrice looked down at her hands, still wrapped around the now cool teacup. She thought about her options, really thought about them without the rose-colored optimism that had carried her across the country. She could accept Roland's loan and try to make her way in California or another city, but with no references and limited funds, she would likely end up in a factory or as a domestic servant in some stranger's house, always vulnerable, always one mishap away from ruin. Or she could take a chance on this quiet, grieving rancher who had shown her more kindness in 2 hours than her own aunt had shown in 2 years. "I will marry you," she said, looking up to meet his eyes, "but I have one condition." Roland raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" "That you give me a chance to know you, truly know you, before we make any decisions about the more intimate aspects of marriage. I understand this is practical, but I would like to believe we can become friends at least. Partners in truth, not just on paper." Something softened in Roland's expression, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I can agree to that, Miss Rosewood. Partners and friends seems like a solid foundation." "Then yes," Beatrice said, and felt a strange calm settle over her. "I will marry you, Mr. Vance." "Roland," he corrected gently. "If we are going to be married, you should call me Roland." "Roland," Beatrice repeated, trying out the name, "and you should call me Beatrice." "Beatrice." He said it slowly, as if tasting the syllables. Then he held out his hand and she placed hers in it. His grip was warm and firm, and when he squeezed her fingers gently, she felt something she had not felt since boarding the stage in Boston. Hope. Mrs. Chen reappeared then, bustling with purpose, and shooed Roland away so Beatrice could rest properly. She led Beatrice to a small bedroom at the back of the house, clearly the housekeeper's own room, and insisted Beatrice take the bed while she rested in the chair. Beatrice was too exhausted to argue. She crawled under the heavy quilts and fell asleep almost instantly, her last conscious thought being that her life had taken a turn she never could have imagined. And somehow, impossibly, it might work out after all. She woke to afternoon light slanting through the window and the smell of cooking food. For a disoriented moment, she could not remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The frozen wait in the stagecoach, Roland Vance's rescue, his unexpected proposal, her acceptance. She sat up slowly, noting that someone had laid out a simple dress on the chair by the bed. It was too big for her, clearly meant for a larger woman, but it was clean and warm. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway as if summoned by Beatrice's waking. "You dress," she said, pointing to the clothes. "Then eat. Roland, bring your trunk from stage." "Thank you," Beatrice said. "Mrs. Chen, I appreciate your kindness." The elderly woman waved a dismissive hand but looked pleased. "You good girl," she pronounced. "Roland need good wife, you be good wife." After Mrs. Chen left, Beatrice washed her face in the basin provided and changed into the borrowed dress. It hung loosely on her frame, but she belted it with her own sash and managed to make it look presentable. Her hair was a disaster, half fallen from its pins, so she took it down completely and braided it in a simple plait down her back. When she emerged into the main room, she found Roland sitting at a large wooden table, papers spread before him. He looked up at her entrance and stood politely. "You look better," he said, "less like a frozen sparrow." Beatrice laughed, surprised by his dry humor. "I feel better, more like a living person and less like an ice sculpture." Mrs. Chen brought food, thick vegetable soup, fresh bread, and strong coffee. Beatrice ate gratefully while Roland explained his plan. "If you are still agreeable, we can be married tomorrow," he said. "Reverend Miller lives just outside town. He is a good man, discreet. We can keep it simple and quiet." "That sounds fine," Beatrice agreed. "I have no need for a grand ceremony. After the wedding, I will take you around the ranch, show you how things work," Roland continued. "Mrs. Chen can help you learn the daily routines. The house is yours to manage as you see fit. If you need anything, supplies or help or whatever, you need only ask." They spent the rest of the afternoon in practical discussion. Roland showed her the house room by room. It was solidly built, with a large kitchen, the main living area, 3 bedrooms, and even a small room Roland used as an office for managing ranch accounts. The furniture was well made but sparse, and Beatrice could see where a woman's touch might make the place more comfortable. The windows had no curtains, there were no decorations on the walls, and the overall feeling was of a place that had been abandoned emotionally even as it was maintained physically. "Sarah made curtains," Roland said quietly as they stood in what would be their bedroom. "Cheerful yellow ones. I took them down after she died, could not stand looking at them." "I understand," Beatrice said, and she did. Grief was a strange thing manifesting in unexpected ways. "Would it bother you if I made new ones, different colors, a different style?" Roland considered this. "No," he said finally. "I think that would be all right. Just not yellow." "Not yellow," Beatrice agreed. That evening, Mrs. Chen returned to her own family, and Beatrice found herself alone with Roland for the first time. He seemed aware of the potential awkwardness because he immediately suggested they play cards to pass the time. They sat by the fire, and he taught her a simple game while they talked. "Tell me about your family," Roland said as he dealt the cards. "Your parents, what they were like." Beatrice felt the familiar ache of loss but found she could speak about it without the crushing weight she usually felt. "My father was a clerk in a shipping company, not wealthy but comfortable. He loved books and music. My mother was very gentle, very kind. She used to sing while she worked." She arranged her cards. "They died within days of each other. The scarlet fever swept through our neighborhood that winter. I was at a friend's house when they fell ill, and by the time I came home, they were both gone." "That is a hard thing," Roland said, "to not get to say goodbye." "Yes." Beatrice played a card. "My aunt took me in, but she made it clear it was a burden. She had her own children, her own life. I tried to make myself useful to earn my keep, but I always felt like an imposition. When I saw Gerald Hutchins's advertisement, it felt like an escape." "And now you have escaped to an even stranger situation," Roland observed. "Perhaps," Beatrice allowed, "but at least you have been honest about what you are offering. That is more than I can say for some." They played in companionable silence for a while, and then Roland said, "I should tell you about Sarah. It does not seem right to pretend she never existed." "I would like to hear about her," Beatrice said gently, "if you want to share." Roland set down his cards and stared into the fire. "We grew up on neighboring ranches. I knew her my whole life, seems like. She had red hair and freckles and the loudest laugh you ever heard. Used to tease me something fierce when we were children." His mouth curved in a sad smile. "We married when I was 21 and she was 19. Built this house together, planned our future. She wanted a house full of children, at least 6, she used to say. When she got pregnant, we were over the moon," he continued. "Everything seemed fine until the labor started. It went on too long," Doc Peterson said. Something was wrong, baby was breech or twisted, he could not tell. By the time he got the baby out, Sarah had bled too much. The boy never even drew a breath. "Roland," Beatrice whispered, her heart breaking for him. "I am so sorry." "Buried them together," Roland said, his voice thick. out on the hill overlooking the ranch. For months after, I could not see the point of anything. Kept the ranch running because the animals needed tending, but I was just going through the motions. It was only recently I realized I had to decide whether to keep living or just exist. I chose living, but I knew I could not do it the same way as before. Could not look for love again, could not risk that kind of loss. But maybe I could build something different, something solid and practical and good in its own way. I think that is very brave, Beatrice said. Choosing to keep going even when it hurts. Roland looked at her then, really looked at her, and Beatrice saw the depth of pain he carried, but also a core of strength that had not been broken. "You are easy to talk to," he said. "I did not expect that." "You are not what I expected either," Beatrice admitted. "In a good way." That night, Beatrice slept in the guest room and Roland in his own. But before they parted, he took her hand and held it for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for agreeing to this, for giving me a chance." "Thank you for remembering me," Beatrice said. "When I was frozen and forgotten in that stagecoach, you came looking. You could have left me there." "I have been remembering you," Roland said softly, "since I heard there was a woman coming for Gerald. I kept thinking about how hopeful you must be, traveling all this way for a new life. When Gerald died, I could not stop wondering what would happen to you. That is why I went to check the stage when I heard it had arrived late. I had to know if you had made it safely." Beatrice felt something warm unfurl in her chest. He had been thinking of her before they ever met, worrying about a stranger's welfare. It spoke to his character more than any words could. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Mrs. Chen arrived early and helped Beatrice prepare. From her trunk, they retrieved Beatrice's best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes. Mrs. Chen pressed it carefully and helped her arrange her hair in a softer style than her usual practical bun. Roland appeared in a clean shirt and his best coat, his hair combed back and his jaw freshly shaved. He looked younger without the rough stubble, and Beatrice realized he was actually quite handsome in a rugged way. They rode together to Reverend Miller's small church on the outskirts of Pahrump. The Reverend was a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes and a warm handshake. If he found anything unusual about marrying two virtual strangers, he kept it to himself. Mrs. Chen and her husband served as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and brief. Beatrice repeated the traditional vows, promising to honor and obey, though Roland quietly asked the Reverend to change the wording to honor and cherish. They exchanged plain gold bands that Roland had purchased in town that morning, and then the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Miller said with a smile. Roland looked at Beatrice questioningly, and she nodded slightly. He leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to her lips, barely more than a brush of contact, but Beatrice felt it all the way to her toes. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, and when he pulled back, his dark eyes held a question she was not quite ready to answer. They signed the necessary papers, and just like that, Beatrice Rosewood became Beatrice Vance. It felt surreal, as if she was watching someone else's life unfold rather than her own. But when Roland helped her back onto his horse, and she felt his solid warmth behind her as they rode back to the ranch, it began to feel real. Over the following days, Beatrice settled into her new life with determined practicality. Mrs. Chen taught her the daily routines, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, managing the kitchen stores, preparing meals. The work was harder than anything Beatrice had done in her aunt's refined Boston household, but she found a satisfaction in it that had been missing from her previous life. Here, her efforts had immediate, visible results. The meals she cooked fed her household. The eggs she gathered became breakfast. The clothes she mended were worn by her husband. It was strange to think of Roland that way, but he made it easy by being consistently kind and respectful. He never entered her room without knocking, never made demands on her time or energy, and always thanked her for meals and other services. They fell into an easy routine of breakfasting together, spending the day on their separate tasks, and gathering again for dinner and the evening hours. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Roland told her about the ranch, his plans for the future, the challenges of raising cattle in Nevada's harsh climate. Beatrice shared stories of her childhood, her parents, her dreams of someday having a real home of her own. Gradually, they began to learn each other's habits and preferences, the small details that make up a life shared. One afternoon, about a week after the wedding, Beatrice was in the kitchen making bread when Roland came in from the barn looking troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked, wiping flour from her hands. "Lost a calf to a mountain lion," Roland said grimly. "Found tracks near the north pasture. Going to have to move the herd closer to the house for a while, keep a better watch." "Is that dangerous?" Beatrice asked. "The mountain lion, I mean." "Can be," Roland admitted. "They usually avoid humans, but a cat bold enough to come this close to the ranch might be desperate or injured. I will have to track it, make sure it moves on, or deal with it if necessary." "Be careful," Beatrice said, and was surprised by the genuine worry in her own voice. Roland looked surprised too, but pleased. "I will," he promised. "Been handling predators since I was a boy. This one will not get the better of me." That night, Roland showed Beatrice how to load and fire the rifle he kept by the door. "Probably will not need it," he said, "but I want you to know how, just in case. If something threatens you or the livestock while I am out on the range, I need to know you can protect yourself." Beatrice proved to be a decent shot after a few practice rounds, much to Roland's approval. "You have steady hands," he observed. "That is good." Over the next few days, Roland spent long hours tracking the mountain lion. He would leave before dawn and return after dark, tired and dusty but determined. Beatrice found herself watching for his return each evening, listening for the sound of his horse's hooves, and feeling a relief that went beyond practical concern when he finally appeared. On the fourth evening, Roland came home with the mountain lion's pelt. "Found him in a canyon to the north," he explained as Beatrice helped him out of his coat. "Old male, half-starved, probably could not hunt properly anymore, which is why he risked coming after the livestock." "Did you have to kill him?" Beatrice asked, looking at the beautiful spotted fur. "Yes," Roland said simply. "Could not risk him coming back, but I made it quick and clean. He did not suffer." Beatrice nodded, understanding the necessity even as she felt a pang for the creature. Life and death were intertwined on the ranch in ways they never had been in Boston, and she was learning to accept that. That night, as they sat by the fire, Roland seemed more relaxed than he had been in days. The threat was gone, his livestock was safe, and the tension that had been riding his shoulders had eased. "You handled this week well," he said suddenly. "I know it was not easy, me being gone so much, the worry about the lion, but you did not complain, just kept things running smooth." "It is my job," Beatrice said, "as your wife and partner." "It is more than that," Roland insisted. "You could have been afraid, could have insisted I stay close to the house, but you trusted me to handle it and handled your own responsibilities without fuss. That means something." Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest. His approval mattered, she realized. Somewhere in the past week and a half, she had begun to care what Roland thought of her, to want to please him not out of obligation but genuine desire. As winter deepened, Beatrice and Roland grew more comfortable with each other. They developed small rituals, morning coffee shared in companionable silence, evening card games by the fire, Sunday afternoon spent reading aloud from Roland's small collection of books. Mrs. Chen teased them gently about being like an old married couple, and Beatrice supposed they were in their own way. 2 weeks before Christmas, Roland came home with a small pine tree tied to his saddle. "Thought we could decorate it," he said, looking almost shy. "Sarah used to love Christmas. We have not celebrated properly since she died, but it seems wrong not to with you here." Beatrice felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I would like that," she said. "Very much." They spent an evening making decorations from scraps of fabric and bits of ribbon Beatrice had saved. Roland produced a box of ornaments from the attic, beautiful glass spheres that had belonged to Sarah, and after a moment of hesitation, hung them on the tree himself. "She would be glad they are being used," he said quietly. "She loved beautiful things, hated waste." "She sounds like she was wonderful," Beatrice said. "She was," Roland agreed. "But so are you, Beatrice, in a different way but just as real." Christmas Day arrived cold and bright. Beatrice woke to find a package wrapped in brown paper on the kitchen table with her name written in Roland's careful script. Inside was a beautiful shawl, soft wool dyed a deep green that must have cost dearly. "It matches your eyes," Roland said, when she found him in the barn tending the horses. "Saw it in the general store window and thought of you." "Thank you," Beatrice said, wrapping it around her shoulders. "It is beautiful. I made something for you too." She presented him with a new shirt she had sewn in secret during the hours he was out on the range. It was made from good quality fabric she had purchased with her own small savings, and she had put careful work into making the stitches even and strong. Roland held it up, examining it with the serious attention he gave everything. "This is fine work," he said. "Better than anything I could buy in town." "Thank you, Beatrice." They celebrated quietly with a special dinner Beatrice had prepared: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and a pie made from preserved apples. As they ate, Roland told stories of Christmases past, both happy memories with Sarah and older ones from his childhood. Beatrice shared her own memories, and for the first time in years, the holiday felt warm and meaningful rather than a painful reminder of everything she had lost. That evening, as they sat by the fire with their coffee, Roland reached over and took Beatrice's hand. It had become an occasional gesture between them, this simple hand holding, but it never failed to make Beatrice's heart beat faster. "I am glad you are here," Roland said. "I know our circumstances are unusual, but I cannot imagine going back to how things were before. You have brought life back into this house." "You saved mine," Beatrice said honestly. "I would have frozen in that stagecoach if you had not come looking. Everything I have now, this home, this life, it is because you cared enough to check on a stranger." "You are not a stranger anymore," Roland said, his dark eyes intent on her face. "You are my wife, my partner. You are Beatrice, and I cannot imagine my days without you in them." Beatrice felt something shift inside her, a wall she had been keeping carefully maintained beginning to crumble. "Roland," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "When we married, we agreed this would be practical, a partnership without expectations of love or romance. And I understood that, appreciated it even. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way my feelings have changed." She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I care for you, more than as a partner or friend. I look forward to your presence, worry when you are gone, feel happiness when you are near. I do not expect you to return these feelings. I know your heart is still with Sarah, but I needed to be honest." Roland was quiet for a long moment, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I have been remembering you," he said. "Even before you came, when you were just an idea, a woman brave enough to travel across the country for a fresh start. And then you arrived, frozen and frightened but still strong, still dignified. Every day since, I find myself noticing new things about you. The way you hum while you work, how you talk to the chickens like they are old friends, the determined set of your jaw when you are learning something new. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I told you I could not love again, that I had spent my capacity for love on Sarah. But I am beginning to think I was wrong. Not about loving Sarah, that was real and deep and will always be a part of me. But love is not a finite resource. The heart can expand to hold more than we think possible. What are you saying? Beatrice whispered. I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Beatrice Vance. It is not the same as what I felt for Sarah. It could not be because you are not her and I am not the same man I was then. But it is real and it is growing stronger every day. If you want more from this marriage than what we originally agreed, if you want me to court you properly and see where these feelings take us, I would very much like that. Beatrice felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Yes, she said. Yes, I want that. Roland cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. May I kiss you? He asked. Properly this time, please, Beatrice breathed. When Roland's lips met hers this time, it was nothing like the chaste brush of contact at their wedding. This kiss was deep and thorough, full of promise and barely restrained desire. Beatrice felt heat flood through her body, pooling low in her belly. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Roland rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. Court you properly, give you time to be sure. We do not have to rush anything. I am sure, Beatrice said. I have been sure for weeks now, I just did not let myself acknowledge it. But Roland, I want a real marriage with you, in every sense. Beatrice, Roland groaned. Are you certain? Once we cross this line, there is no going back. I have never been more certain of anything, Beatrice assured him. I want to be your wife in truth, not just on paper. I want to share your bed, your life, your future. All of it. Roland searched her face for a long moment, and whatever he saw there must have convinced him because he stood and held out his hand. Then come with me. Beatrice placed her hand in his and let him lead her to what had been his bedroom and would now be theirs. Inside, Roland lit the lamp on the nightstand, casting the room in warm, golden light. Then he turned to face her, his expression tender and serious all at once. I will be gentle, he promised. And if at any point you want to stop, we stop. Your comfort matters more to me than anything else. I trust you, Beatrice said simply, and saw the impact of those words in the way Roland's eyes darkened with emotion. He kissed her again, slower this time, taking his time to explore and savor. His hands moved to the buttons of her dress, and Beatrice felt a moment of nervousness. She had seen drawings in medical books, had heard whispered conversations between married women, but the reality of intimate relations was still largely a mystery to her. Roland seemed to sense her nerves because he pulled back slightly. We will take this slow, he murmured against her lips. I want to learn what pleases you, what makes you feel good. This is not just about me, and he kept his word. What followed was a revelation to Beatrice. Roland undressed her slowly, reverently, praising each newly revealed bit of skin. His touch was gentle but sure, and he paid attention to her reactions, adjusting his approach based on her sighs and gasps. When he finally laid her on the bed and joined their bodies, it hurt less than she had feared and felt more right than she had imagined possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, Beatrice's head resting on Roland's chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. Are you all right? He asked softly. "More than all right," Beatrice assured him. "That was wonderful. You were wonderful." "So were you," Roland said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "So beautiful and responsive, and mine." "Yours," Beatrice agreed, liking the sound of it. "And you are mine." "Always," Roland promised. From that night forward, their marriage transformed into something neither of them had expected but both treasured. The practical partnership remained, but it was now undergirded with genuine affection and growing love. They shared a bed each night, learning each other's bodies with the same dedication they had brought to learning each other's minds and hearts. January brought harsh storms that trapped them inside for days at a time, but Beatrice found she did not mind. The house felt cozy rather than confining with Roland there, and they passed the time playing cards, reading, talking, and making love by the firelight. Mrs. Chen could not make it through the snow, so it was just the two of them, and Beatrice found she loved the intimacy of it. When the storms finally broke and life returned to normal, Beatrice discovered she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, not wanting to get Roland's hopes up when there were other explanations. But when she missed a second month and began feeling nauseous in the mornings, she could no longer deny the possibility. She waited until they were sitting together after dinner to tell him. "Roland," she said, setting down her sewing, "I think I might be with child." Roland went very still, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "You think?" "I am fairly certain," Beatrice clarified. "I have missed my courses twice now, and I have been feeling ill in the mornings. I thought perhaps we should send for Dr. Peterson to be sure." Roland set down his cup carefully, as if afraid he might drop it. "A baby," he said, his voice rough. "You are carrying my baby." "It would seem so," Beatrice said, watching his face anxiously. She knew his history, knew the pain wrapped up in the idea of children for him. "Roland, I know this might be frightening for you, given what happened with Sarah. But Dr. Peterson is much more experienced now, and I am young and healthy. We will do everything right." Roland crossed to her in 2 long strides and pulled her up into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears streaming down his face, but he was smiling. "I am terrified," he admitted. "Absolutely terrified of losing you the way I lost Sarah. But I am also happier than I have been in years. We made a life together, Beatrice. A baby that is part you and part me. That is a miracle. We will be careful," Beatrice promised. "And we will face whatever comes together." Dr. Peterson confirmed the pregnancy the following week. He examined Beatrice thoroughly and pronounced her in excellent health. "Baby should come late summer, early September by my calculations," he said. "You are young and strong, Mrs. Vance. I see no reason to expect complications, but we will monitor things carefully given your husband's history." Roland became almost comically protective. He would not let Beatrice lift anything heavy, insisted she rest frequently, and worried if she so much as sneezed. Beatrice found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood the fear driving his behavior. One evening she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Feel that?" she asked. "That is our baby growing safe and strong. You need to trust that everything will be all right." "I am trying," Roland said. "It is just hard not to remember." "Then make new memories," Beatrice suggested. "Instead of focusing on what went wrong before, think about all the ways this is different. We are different people, facing different circumstances. This is our story, Roland, not a repeat of the past." Her words seemed to help. Gradually, Roland's worry transformed into excitement. He began making plans for expanding the house to add a proper nursery, built a cradle from oak wood during the long winter evenings, and talked about teaching their son or daughter to ride as soon as they were old enough. Spring came in a rush of green and wildflowers. Beatrice's pregnancy became obvious as her belly swelled, and she found she loved the physical evidence of the life growing inside her. Mrs. Chen was delighted, already planning celebrations and making tiny clothes for the baby. One warm April afternoon, Beatrice was in the garden planting vegetables when she felt the first flutter of movement in her womb. She stopped, her hand going to her stomach, waiting. There it was again, a gentle tumbling sensation like butterfly wings. Roland. She called and he came running from the barn, fear on his face. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, no," Beatrice said quickly, taking his hand and pressing it to her belly. "I just felt the baby move for the first time. Wait, maybe you can feel it too." They stood together in the garden, Roland's large hand spread over her stomach, waiting. And then it happened again, that fluttering movement, and Roland's eyes went wide. "I felt it," he breathed. "That was our baby." "Our baby," Beatrice confirmed, smiling at the wonder on his face. Summer arrived hot and bright. Beatrice grew larger and more uncomfortable, but she tried not to complain. Roland did everything he could to ease her discomfort, bringing her cool water from the well, helping her elevate her swollen feet, rubbing her aching back without being asked. In late August, they had a scare when Beatrice began experiencing cramping pains. Dr. Peterson came immediately and examined her carefully, but declared that everything was normal, just the body preparing for the labor to come. "Could be any day now," he told them. "Or could be another few weeks. Babies come on their own schedule, but everything looks good, Mrs. Vance. Your baby is positioned correctly, strong heartbeat, and you are healthy. When the time comes, we will manage just fine." The labor began on a bright September morning. Beatrice woke to strong contractions and fluid soaking the bed. Roland, who had been sleeping lightly for weeks, was up instantly, sending Mrs. Chen's husband racing for the doctor while he helped Beatrice through the early stages. "You are doing so well," he kept saying, holding her hand through each contraction. "So strong, so brave. I am right here, I am not leaving." Dr. Peterson arrived within the hour and examined Beatrice. "Good strong contractions," he pronounced. "Baby is coming well. Could be a few hours yet, but everything is progressing normally." Those hours were the longest and hardest of Beatrice's life. The pain was intense, worse than anything she had imagined, but Roland never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, murmured encouragement, and when she screamed through the worst contractions, he did not flinch or tell her to be quiet. He just held her tighter and told her she was doing perfectly. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the bedroom window, Dr. Peterson said, "Next contraction, I want you to push. Your baby is ready to meet the world." Beatrice bore down with all her strength, Roland supporting her from behind, and felt the overwhelming sensation of her baby moving through her body and into the world. One more push, and then the room filled with the loud, indignant cry of a newborn. "It is a boy," Dr. Peterson announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A fine, healthy boy." Roland was crying openly now, his face pressed against Beatrice's sweat-soaked hair. "You did it," he sobbed. "You are alive and the baby is alive and you did it." The doctor cleaned the baby quickly and placed him on Beatrice's chest. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the miniature hands waving in the air, and felt her heart expand to accommodate this new, fierce love. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." The baby had Roland's dark hair and what would probably be his dark eyes once they settled from their newborn blue. His face was red and scrunched, and he was the most beautiful thing Beatrice had ever seen. "What should we name him?" Roland asked, his voice still thick with emotion. Beatrice thought for a moment. "What about Robert?" she suggested. "We could call him Robbie." "Robert Vance," Roland said, trying it out. "I like it. Strong name for a strong boy. He reached out and gently touched his son's tiny hand, and Robbie immediately gripped his father's finger with surprising strength. "Look at that grip," Roland marveled. "He is going to be a rancher for sure." Over the next few weeks, they settled into the exhausting but joyful rhythm of new parenthood. Robbie was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged, and Beatrice took to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to everything else in her new life. Roland was a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings, walking Robbie around the house when he was fussy, and gazing at his son with an expression of such pure love that it made Beatrice's heart ache in the best way. One evening, when Robbie was about 6 weeks old, Beatrice found Roland standing by the cradle just watching their son sleep. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, coming to stand beside him. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Roland said. "A year and a half ago I was alone in this house, convinced I had nothing left to live for. And now I have you and Robbie and a future that looks bright instead of bleak. It is almost too much to comprehend." "I know what you mean," Beatrice said. "When I think about how close I came to freezing in that stagecoach, how different everything could have been if you had not come looking for me, it terrifies me." Roland put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "But I did come looking. I remembered you when no one else did, and that changed everything. You were meant to be here, Beatrice. With me, building this life, raising this boy. I believe that with everything I am." "I believe it too," Beatrice said, leaning into his warmth. Robbie grew quickly, hitting each milestone with enthusiasm. By the time he was 6 months old, he was sitting up and babbling constantly. Roland would carry him around the ranch, pointing out the animals and explaining the work, and Robbie would watch everything with intense focus, as if committing it all to memory. The following spring, when Robbie was learning to walk, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, only joy. They had proven they could do this, could bring a healthy baby into the world, and they were ready to expand their family. Their daughter arrived on a crisp October evening, coming into the world so fast that Dr. Peterson barely made it in time. She was smaller than Robbie had been, more delicate, with Beatrice's gray eyes and a wisp of hair that looked like it would be lighter than her brother's. "What about Margaret?" Roland suggested. "We could call her Maggie." "Margaret Rose Vance," Beatrice said, kissing her daughter's downy head. "It is perfect." Robbie, now a toddling 18-month-old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would stand by her cradle for long stretches, watching her sleep, and insisted on bringing her his toys even though she was far too young to appreciate them. "Gentle," Roland would remind him, guiding Robbie's chubby hand to stroke Maggie's cheek softly. "She is little. We have to be gentle." As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Roland's careful management and Beatrice's efficient household practices meant they not only survived but thrived. They expanded the herd, improved the house, and became respected members of the Pahrump community. People who had known Sarah and mourned with Roland after her death came to accept Beatrice as his wife and appreciate the life they had built together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Roland surprised Beatrice by taking her on a picnic to a beautiful spot overlooking their land. It was a rare afternoon away from the children, who were being watched by Mrs. Chen, and they sat together on a blanket, enjoying the quiet. 5 years, Roland said, shaking his head. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday you stepped off that stage, frozen and determined. Other times it feels like we have always been together." "I know exactly what you mean," Beatrice said. "That first night when you proposed, I thought I was making a desperate choice out of necessity. I never imagined I would come to love you so deeply that we would build all this together." "I have been thinking," Roland said, pulling something from his pocket. It was a small wrapped package. "This is for you." Beatrice opened it carefully to find a beautiful locket on a delicate chain. Inside were two tiny painted portraits, one of Robbie and one of Maggie. "Roland," she breathed. "This is beautiful. When did you have these made?" "Been working with an artist in town for the past few months," Roland admitted. "Wanted you to have something special, something that captured this time in our lives." Beatrice fastened the locket around her neck, tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you. I will treasure it always." "There is something else," Roland said, his expression growing serious. "I have never said the words properly, not the way they deserve to be said. I have shown you in 100 ways how I feel, but I want to speak it clearly, so there is no doubt." He took both her hands in his, holding her gaze steadily. "I love you, Beatrice Vance. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You saved me when I was drowning in grief, brought light back into my life, gave me children and joy and a reason to wake up grateful every morning. You are my wife, my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. I will spend every day I have left making sure you know how precious you are to me." Beatrice was crying openly now, happy tears streaming down her face. "I love you too," she said. "So much it sometimes overwhelms me. You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I was alone, love when I expected only practicality. You have been everything I needed and more than I knew to hope for." Roland kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they broke apart, both were smiling through their tears. They stayed on that hillside until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Below them, their ranch spread out in orderly prosperity, a testament to everything they had built together. And in the distance, they could see the road that had brought Beatrice to Pahrump all those years ago, frozen and forgotten until a cowboy remembered. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. There were harsh winters and dry summers, cattle that got sick and crops that failed. But through it all, Beatrice and Roland faced everything together, their partnership strong and their love growing deeper with each passing season. They had 2 more children, another son they named Thomas, and a second daughter they called Caroline. The house rang with children's laughter, and the ranch thrived under Roland's careful stewardship and Beatrice's efficient management. Robbie grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch work, following his father around from the time he could walk and absorbing everything Roland taught him. Maggie was spirited and fearless, insisting on learning to ride as young as her brother had and showing a natural talent with horses. Thomas was gentle and thoughtful, preferring books to ranch work, but still capable and willing when needed. Caroline was the baby, doted on by her older siblings, and possessing a charm that could wrap anyone around her little finger. Mrs. Chen remained a constant presence, aging gracefully and dispensing wisdom to Beatrice about child rearing and life. She became like a grandmother to the children, teaching them about herbs and traditional medicine, telling them stories from her childhood in China, and sneaking them treats when Beatrice was not looking. On a warm summer evening when Beatrice was 35 and Roland was 40, they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Robbie was teaching Maggie a rope trick while Thomas read aloud to Caroline, and the scene was so peaceful, so perfectly domestic, that Beatrice felt her throat tighten with emotion. "What are you thinking about?" Roland asked, taking her hand as he always did. "I am thinking about that frozen girl in the stagecoach," Beatrice said. "How terrified she was, how uncertain of her future. If I could go back and tell her everything that was waiting for her, that the best years of her life were about to begin, I am not sure she would believe me." "I am thinking about the broken man who went looking for her," Roland replied. who convinced himself he was rescuing her out of simple human decency, not admitting he was also rescuing himself. That man would not have believed he could be this happy again either. "We saved each other," Beatrice said softly. "We did," Roland agreed. "And we built something beautiful from that saving." As the sun set and the children were called in for dinner, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From Boston to Nevada, from frozen desperation to warm security, from a practical arrangement to profound love. She thought about Gerald Hutchins, the man she had come to marry, and sent a silent thank you to his memory. His advertisement had set her on this path, even if he had not lived to be part of it. But mostly she thought about Roland, the cowboy who had remembered her when she was forgotten, who had offered her not just rescue but partnership, not just security but love. He had been patient when she needed time, passionate when she was ready, and steadfast through every challenge they had faced. Years continued to pass in a comfortable rhythm. The children grew and began to establish their own paths. Robbie took over more and more of the ranch work as Roland's hair went gray at the temples. Maggie surprised everyone by falling in love with the son of a neighboring rancher and marrying in a beautiful ceremony on the ranch. Thomas went east to study law, though he promised to return. Caroline showed signs of her mother's practical nature and her father's quiet strength. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Roland and Beatrice traveled back to the Pahrump station where their story had begun. The town had grown considerably in 2 decades, the rough mining settlement transforming into a more established community with proper buildings and even a school. They stood together where the stagecoach had stopped that frozen December night, and Roland pulled Beatrice close. "You remember?" he asked. "Every moment," Beatrice said. "The cold, the fear, the way hope felt impossible, and then you appeared with your lantern and everything changed." "I have been remembering you," Roland said, repeating the words he had spoken that first night. "Every day since, I have been remembering you and thanking whatever providence brought you to me." "And I have been loving you," Beatrice replied. "Every day more than the last for 20 years now." They kissed there in the street, not caring who might see. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth celebrating. More years passed, bringing grandchildren and the continuation of the ranch into a new generation. Robbie married and had 3 children of his own, strong boys who loved the land as much as their grandfather did. Maggie gave them 2 granddaughters who visited often and filled the house with laughter. Thomas returned from his law practice in Sacramento with a wife and twins, settling in Pahrump to serve the growing community. Caroline married a doctor and stayed close to home, blessing Roland and Beatrice with 4 more grandchildren. As Roland and Beatrice entered their 60s, they began to slow down, letting the younger generation take over the heavy work while they provided guidance and wisdom. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by decades of shared experience and mutual support. On a crisp autumn afternoon, much like the one when Maggie had been born, Roland and Beatrice sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play. Roland's hair was white now, his face deeply lined from years in the sun, but his dark eyes were still sharp and full of warmth when he looked at his wife. Beatrice's chestnut hair had gone silver, and her figure had softened with age and childbearing, but Roland still thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She wore the locket he had given her on their 5th anniversary, the portraits inside now joined by painted likenesses of their other children. "We did well," Roland said suddenly. "With our lives, our children, all of it. We did well." "We did," Beatrice agreed, squeezing his hand. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "I want you to know something," Roland said, his voice serious. When I die, whenever that is, I want to be buried on the hill next to Sarah. Not because I love you less, but because she was part of my journey that led me to you. But I want you to know that my heart, the part that matters, that belongs to you completely. You are the love that defined my life, Beatrice. You are the happiness I thought I had lost forever. Beatrice felt tears slip down her weathered cheeks. And you are mine, she said. The unexpected blessing, the love I never thought to find. When my time comes, I will be buried beside you, and we will rest together knowing we used our time on this earth well. No regrets, Roland asked. Not a single one, Beatrice said firmly. Well, perhaps one. I regret that we did not have even more years together. I would have liked 100 instead of however many we get. Roland laughed, the sound rich and warm. 100 years with you would still not be enough, he agreed. They sat together as the sun set, hands intertwined, watching their legacy play and grow in the yard below. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, both of them thought back to that frozen December night so many years ago, when a desperate young woman and a grieving cowboy had found each other and chosen to build something beautiful from their broken pieces. The children called them in for dinner eventually, and they rose slowly, helping each other up with the casual intimacy of long partnership. As they walked into the house they had shared for so many years, filled now with the voices of children and grandchildren, both Roland and Beatrice felt profound gratitude for the path that had brought them here. In the end, their story was one of second chances and unexpected blessings, of a love that began in practicality and grew into something profound. It was a story of remembering and being remembered, of a frozen bride forgotten by fate but claimed by a cowboy who said, "I've been remembering you," and meant it with every fiber of his being. And it was a story with a happy ending, one that played out over decades of shared life, mutual respect, passionate love, and the building of a family and legacy that would endure long after they were gone. For in the end, that is what matters most. Not the grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the daily choice to love, to partner, to build together something greater than either could create alone. Roland and Beatrice Vance lived long, full lives surrounded by the people they loved and the land they had nurtured. When they eventually passed, years apart but bound forever by the love they had shared, they left behind not just a successful ranch but a family strong in love and purpose, a living testament to the power of remembering, of taking chances, and of opening frozen hearts to the possibility of warmth once more. Their grandchildren would tell the story for generations. How their grandmother arrived frozen and forgotten, how their grandfather remembered and rescued, and how together they built a love story for the ages in the wild, beautiful landscape of Nevada in the late 1800s. It was a story that proved love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the most practical decision could lead to the most passionate outcome. And so their story ended not with tragedy or loss, but with the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived, love well given, and a future secured for the generations that would follow. Her last words were of Roland, how she looked forward to seeing him again, how their love had made every moment of her life worthwhile. And in the hearts of their descendants, in the prosperity of the ranch they had built, in the love that continued to bind the family together, Roland and Beatrice lived on. Their story became legend in Pahrump, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. The mail-order bride who arrived frozen, the cowboy who remembered, and the love that grew from the most unlikely of beginnings into something that would never be forgotten. For love, true love, is like that. It remembers when others forget. It warms what has been frozen. It builds from the ashes of loss and the uncertainty of new beginnings. It is practical and passionate, simple and profound, ordinary and miraculous all at once. And when it is real, when it is nurtured and cherished and allowed to grow, it becomes the kind of legacy that echoes through generations, reminding each new love story that anything is possible when two hearts choose to remember each other, to see each other truly, and to build together something beautiful from whatever broken pieces they bring to the union. This was the legacy of Roland and Beatrice Vance, and it was a legacy worth celebrating, worth remembering, worth passing down through the years as a testament to the enduring power of love in all its forms. From frozen desperation to warm fulfillment, from practical arrangement to passionate devotion, from two lonely people to a family that spanned generations. Their story proved that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most extraordinary endings. And in the end, that is exactly what their descendants celebrated. Not just the survival, not just the success, but the love that had made it all possible. The love that had started with a simple act of remembering and grown into something that would never, ever be forgotten.